Metabolic health is a huge topic of interest right now, but how do you know if you're actually metabolically healthy? Stay tuned to this video to find out 6 ways to measure your metabolic health. Welcome back, my friends. My name is Sarah. I am known as Carnivore Yogi. Thank you so much for being here and clicking on today's video. Today, I'm going to give you 6 measurement tools to see if you are metabolically healthy or not. And this is actually based on a study that I'm pretty sure most every doctor that's been on my podcast in the last few years has mentioned, which states that 88% of the US population is metabolically unhealthy. Again, I will link that study in the show notes for you guys if you want to check it out yourself, but I have reviewed it several times. I do think it is a pretty thorough and accurate study. It was done over several years, over several different age ranges, and all ethnicities. So I do think it's a pretty good sample size and that we can draw conclusions like this number of the 88% of people being metabolically unhealthy from the study. So what were those 6 things? Well, we're going to get into that, but a couple quick things. First of all, this is not medical advice. If you fit a couple of these criteria, you are at risk for metabolic disorder, and I recommend working with a healthcare practitioner. Don't take this video as just word. Please go to a doctor or a healthcare practitioner to check these things out. Second of all, the first 3 measurements that I'm going to mention are actually blood tests, and my go-to for at-home blood testing is Let's Get Checked. They are the sponsor of today's video, and I have used them over the last couple of years several times. My discount code is YOGI30, and I'm actually going to link all the tests that I mentioned in the information section if you want to check those out. They are extremely accurate. Several times over the last couple years, I have done the at-home test and also had a blood draw done at my doctor's office on the same day, and the results are always almost completely identical. So I do trust Let's Get Checked. Again, they have been someone I've worked with for the last couple years, and I thank them for sponsoring today's video. All right, let's jump into this topic of metabolic health. Now, again, as I mentioned, if you have 1 or 2 of these markers, you are at risk for metabolic syndrome. If you have 3 or more, you're metabolically unhealthy. All of these markers are without medication. So especially this first one, if you're using something like metformin, you're already metabolically unhealthy. But the first marker is going to be your A1C. And in the study, your A1C had to be a 5.7 or less. I actually think that is pretty generous. I like to see people closer to a 5.0 or under. But for the sake of the study and for this quiz, 5.7 or less on your A1C. Again, the A1C test with Let's Get Checked, I will have linked in the information section in case you want to test that for yourself. Your A1C reflects your average blood sugar numbers for the last 3 months. So it is something that you probably do want to check every 90 days for accuracy's sake. The second and third measurements are actually going to be your cholesterol numbers. No, we're not going to talk about the bad cholesterol in this study. They actually didn't use that. They actually use triglycerides and HDL. So point number 2, you want your triglycerides to be under a 150 on your cholesterol panel. For number 3, it is your HDL. And for women, we want this to be over a 50. For men, we want this to be over a 40. Again, all 3 of these tests linked in the show notes if you want to check this out for yourself. Number 4 is also technically a blood test, but it's easier to do this one with a blood sugar meter. The meter that I use, I will link in the show notes for you guys, but you want your fasting glucose to be under 100. Again, I think this is a little bit generous. I prefer to see people's fasting glucose between a 70 and an 85. But for all intents and purposes of the study, this is how this 88% number was derived. So that is that measurement for number 4. Number 5 is going to be your blood pressure. And we want to see this number at 130 over 85 or less, preferably less. You can typically go to a grocery store or a drugstore, use the little cuff, put your arm in there, and find out what that is. This also has to be without the use of medications. Number 6 is going to be your waist circumference, and you want to measure this first thing in the morning. It's right above or around your belly button. For men, we want to see this less than 40, and for women, we want to see this less than 35. Again, this is pretty generous, but I do think it is a good place to start. Now, those are the 6 measurements. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, if you have 1 or 2 of those, it is a warning sign that there is something awry with your metabolic health. If you have 3 or more, you definitely have metabolic syndrome and should probably work with a doctor. I would actually work with a doctor or a healthcare practitioner if you have 1 or 2 of those. Now, notice that weight was not mentioned, body weight was not mentioned in this study. Now, while I do think that body weight can be a big indicator of metabolic health, in the study, what they found out is that normal weight individuals actually had metabolic health almost as much as individuals who are considered overweight. So just because you are at a normal weight does not mean that you do not have metabolic syndrome or that you are at risk for metabolic syndrome. Now, what to do if you have these risk factors? Number 1, of course, work with a healthcare practitioner, but you might want to consider doing a low carb, carnivore, or keto approach to eating, starting to work with a professional to implement some sort of intermittent fasting. And I also recommend working on your circadian rhythms, because this is something that does not get talked about at all when we talk about metabolic health. But there are tons of studies, which I'll also link in the information section below, that show how mismatched circadian rhythms, disrupted circadian rhythms, lead to metabolic syndrome, such as an elevated A1C, such as high blood pressure. So disrupted circadian rhythms can also be a big contributor to this metabolic syndrome. Now, next week, I'm going to do a video that talks about how to approach a carnivore diet if you are metabolically unhealthy, because I do think that there are different things people should do rather than someone who is just doing the diet more to have an elimination diet or to cut down on different inflammation issues. I do think someone who's metabolically inflexible or unhealthy should approach the diet differently. So make sure you are subscribed so you can check that out as soon as it comes out. And thank you again to my sponsor, Let's Get Checked, for sponsoring today's video. Again, these tests that I have mentioned are linked down in the show notes for you. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Leave me a comment or question if you have one below, and I will talk with you guys again soon. Bye.